Only two sentences here, but I have to read them. For guests in the group, I'm John Hertzler, a member of the Sojourners class. Georgine Russick and her husband Jim Regulin, who is sitting back, moved from Southbury, Connecticut to Manor Four in less than a year ago in May of 25. Georgine has an interesting professional background as an opera singer living in Germany and performing around the world, and then moving to Notre Dame to develop that school's opera department. Today we have an opportunity to learn more about her spiritual journey from Christian to Budapest. Buddhist.
He's probably good.
Well, not going to Budapest today. There we go. Can everybody hear?
Closer.
Close. Can everybody hear now?
Better.
I'll speak up. I have to say that I had never been to a Mennonite service before this morning, and I was quite, it was a pleasure, really. I was quite taken with the music and the quality of the singing, really beautiful, and the inclusivity of the children I was very moved by. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you. Good morning. And I apologize in advance for how much you're going to hear the word I from me today, but I was asked to speak about my journey, and it's kind of hard to do that without talking about yourself. So bear with me. This is a journey that's of no, how do I say this? I'm not here to compare religions necessarily, and I am certainly not making any judgments about religions, various religions, but just to offer my journey that developed according to my needs and my abilities, and one that has taken place over 60 years in 4 countries, 3 continents, and many states in the US. I don't claim to be a representative and certainly not an expert in any religion. But it's very interesting to me that a wide range of religions are based on very similar tenets. Honesty, generosity, morality, nonviolence and compassion, honoring one's parents, etc. And these are also mainstays of Buddhist practice. I was raised Catholic, not happily. And it was at the age of 11, in retrospect, that I began to understand that Catholicism was not the right path for me. And that feeling was anchored as I moved into junior high and high school, during which my leaning to more and more independent thinking was, shall we say, less and less appreciated. Not that I was a wild teenager, but I was certainly an opinionated one. But it was well into my college years before I felt ready to act on this. One of the first manifestations of that was being drawn to Quakers. Now, I can't say how or why I was exposed to the Society of Friends or learned anything about their principles, but I was in college in Washington, D.C., and decided I'd like to attend a Friends meeting. I didn't think twice about the fact that this was in the midst of a Vietnam protest weekend. So my first visit to a friend's meeting in Washington was in early May 1971. And there were many marchers, most of them out-of-town students who had come to Washington to protest the Vietnam War. It had been agreed that the protesters could camp out in one of two large parks on the Potomac River. But instead, the police closed both parks and began arresting groups larger than two in the streets. There were 12,000 people arrested in that one weekend, and I think it was 7,000 on that Sunday were arrested for being on the street. Now sidebar, they did receive remuneration eventually because they were unlawful arrests, and the ACLU, which is one of my heroes, got to work and made sure that these people were taken care of eventually. But that Sunday, when I arrived at the Florida Avenue meeting house, which was unbeknownst to me, a political hotbed, if you will, of longstanding, I found that meeting house packed to the gills with protesters. Quakers were sheltering and protecting from being arrested on the street. So it was not only a lot of people, it was a lot of energy. And I recall the atmosphere being electric, the emotions were running very high, as you might imagine. Very unusual for Quakers to be as noisy as those were. And it was an eye-opener to a neophyte spiritual seeker that anger and noise could be spiritual, but it was. So it was an exciting experience, but I didn't know what to make of it. A few weeks later, when I returned to that same meeting, it was on a day of spirited debate on whether to bounce Richard Nixon out of the Society of Friends. You all know that Nixon was a Quaker. It was a very, very vociferous discussion. Once again, they didn't really come to a conclusion. They certainly, I don't believe, not on that day anyway, didn't make any action. But that was also an eye-opener and taught me that pacifism, specifically Quaker pacifism, did not mean simply sitting around bemoaning violence and war. They got up and did something about it. So a few years later, I didn't join the Society of Friends at that point. A few years later, I moved to Germany and stayed there for 8 years, where Quakers were few and far between, as were Jewish people. That was kind of a jolt, makes sense, but it was kind of a jolt. This was in the early 70s, mid-70s. Rather than espousing a German religion of the same ilk as the Catholicism that I had already gone by in my life, I convinced myself that my dedication to truth and beauty, which was true, I convinced myself that that was enough. And during that time, I proposed and participated in what this group of expatriate, mostly Americans, but some British people as well, we called it a house church, to get together in each other's homes and discuss our spiritual issues. That was what we had. That was what we could do. When I returned from Germany, I became a member of the Bennington, Vermont Quaker meeting after study and guidance from some really wonderful elders, kind, generous people. I recall telling an older friend as we went to this meeting, I told her that I was interested and she offered to take me there, being a Quaker herself. And on the drive I confided that I thought that if I were truly aiming for spirituality, I should be able to do it alone without relying on other people. And this friend pulled off the road, stopped her car, and looked at me and said, "Who are you to think that you can do this all by yourself? And what's wrong with a little help?" I've carried that with me ever since. This woman is recently deceased. Thank you, Sheeta. I came to treasure the often wonderful, occasional mystical experiences of being led by the Spirit, arriving at a sense of the meeting. You probably have all heard that term, the sense of the meeting, which doesn't mean agreement, by the way, necessarily. And it might be, certainly there was no action taken until the meeting came to a point where they could move forward comfortably, reasonably comfortably. Sometimes the discussions went on for weeks. Sometimes they weren't pretty. I recall a really fraught, lengthy series of discussions about a man who had a sex change and became a woman. And it was a question of, do we allow this person in our meeting? He had been a member of the meeting for quite a while, but it was really disturbing to some people. It was very moving to me to watch this process. She eventually was asked to address the meeting herself and to give her story of why she felt a need to do what she did. And if gradually that became accepted. Sometimes, excuse me, sometimes the consensus was reached in silence, leaving only details to be discussed aloud after the meeting rose. That was also just a wonder to me. I could feel it. I could feel consensus going around the room like a little current, you know. And the excitement when the meeting rose of, okay, that part's done. How do we do this? Whatever it may be. I accepted my dear husband's proposal of marriage in the midst of a Quaker meeting, to the astonishment of myself and him and everybody else present. Wasn't expecting that to happen. So I found much to admire. I'm so sorry. I found much to admire about the Quakers. And I want to tell you one of my favorite stories. I'm sure you all know that some of the early abolitionists were Quaker, but these people were fined for their beliefs $1,000 or more, which went a long way in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Some of the abolitionists were fined much more than that. I read a statement this week about a man who was fined $5,000 that broke him. One of my favorite stories, though, is not far from here, and involved a group of bounty hunters tracking down runaway slaves who had fled through Indiana into Michigan. They knew they were close when they got to Schoolcraft, Michigan. This sounds like it just cut out. Can you hear me still? It's okay? No.
That's down.
I'll shout at you a little bit. There were.
Very spiritual group.
There were, in fact, a large number of slaves in Schoolcraft that were just about to be sent further along the Underground Railroad. And these peaceful Quakers, who were warned by the bounty hunters that they would be obligated to surrender all slaves the next morning under the new Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, These Quakers waited until dark. And after all of the bounty hunters had gone to bed, they took all the wheels off their wagons and threw them in the lake. Then they used their own wagons and buggies, anything they could muster, to get their charges to safety so that they could be sent along the Underground Railroad. That story has also stayed with me for a long time. I love going through Schoolcraft because it always makes me think of them throwing their wheels in the lake. So I had and still have enormous respect for Quaker faith and practice. But depending on a given day, a meeting might be very profound, or it could get stale while people were waiting to be led by the Spirit. Sometimes that was an active part of the meeting, as I described. Sometimes it was a little empty. So I felt a need for greater consistency and rigor in the day-to-day practice of religion. For several years after that, I promised myself to attend more fully to my spiritual life at some point in the future, when I had more time than I thought my demanding job could possibly permit. That could have been the end of my quest. In my early 20s, I was drawn to Eastern thought and philosophy, but I didn't get any further than reading a book or two on the Bhagavad Gita. That's an epic poem about Hindu theology, and the Upanishads, one of the 4 genres of texts that constitute the Vedas, sacred scriptures of most of the Hindu traditions, as well as very glancing reading of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which I still own, along with its more accurate modern version, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The first two, the Bhagavad Gita and the Hindus, the Upanishads, I think I was drawn to as much as anything else because the poetry was beautiful. But the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a different thing altogether. If I had thought directly about Buddhism in the early days of my adulthood, it was with an attitude of some trepidation, maybe even suspicion. And I find that a lot of people are suspicious of Buddhism. I think in my case, it was attributable to the strangeness of it all. You know, it was a world apart for a young woman from the woods in Pennsylvania. And the fact that my parents' assumption that I would go straight to hell were espousing such a thing. I had no readily available means to pursue this interest, which thus remained unexplored for decades. Then came 2016. I don't necessarily want to bring politics into this discussion, but 2016 was a turning point for me, and I suspect a lot of people. As a new meditator, I attended the Trump rally in Elkhart in a naive attempt to go and sit quietly in meditation right in front of him and wait for him to ask me why I was doing so. Then I planned to use my singing training to call him out for a liar in a place where there were 7,000 people. Not exactly peaceful in intent. But at any rate, I didn't even get close to the telegenic cowgirls in the front row. And from my seat in the peanut gallery way up towards the roof, I was overwhelmed. I sat in meditation while everybody else was jumping up and down while the preparatory speeches were happening. But I was overwhelmed at the literal rafter-shaking reception of Mike Pence and then Trump. You could feel the building shake. And then came the systematic demolishing of then Senator Joe Donnelly. It was brilliantly done, and I'm sure that Senator Donnelly lost 7,000 votes that day. So after the presidential election, I didn't know what to do. Like many people, I learned later, when I walked outside the next day, I was confounded that everything looked normal. When to me, the world had gone through a sea change. I wasn't a marcher or a shouter, well, except occasionally to my children, they will attest. I founded that in the early days of the Muslim ban provided me with my direction. And I founded a meditation group, non-denominational, I'm just not in command of my tongue this morning, I apologize. Nobody was turned away. I guided people from all faiths and religions. And I was active at that point in a group in South Bend. It was an interfaith women's group that got together once a month and traded, every month it was in a different faith, different group of hostesses, if you will. And they mixed us up so that they had a few questions to ask. You would answer those questions from your knowledge of your own faith. Each person in a table of 5 or so would do this. Many of those members of this meditation group came from that interfaith women's group. But eventually we had Church of the Brethren, we had Jewish people, we had Muslim women, we had a Catholic female bishop and her husband. That was an interesting new thing for me. Turned out she was a good friend of my sister's in Pennsylvania. I mean, the way things come together. And after about a year of meditation, on the evening of the winter solstice, everyone present in that group had an extraordinary meditative experience. No two the same, no two even similar. And when the attendees quite reasonably began asking me for clarification and interpretation of what they had experienced, I really didn't have anything to say. I didn't know. But I did realize that if I were to facilitate a meditation group, it behooved me to get me to learn more about meditation, a lot more about meditation. And that took me where else but into the arms of the Buddhists. My son likes to say that it was Trump's fault that I became a Buddhist. As I reflected this week, I realized that 2 American presidents were involved in my, let's say, gravitating towards a new religion. Trump and also Nixon, if you remember my stories about the Florida Avenue Quaker meeting. In January 2020, just before COVID-19 hit in this country, I was fortunate to be able to travel to Bodh Gaya, India, the site of the Buddha's first teaching after he attained enlightenment, where I received a vow from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and was part of what was billed as a private audience, which actually was 30 or 40 people. But I have a few pictures over here, and there's a picture of me receiving a greeting from the Dalai Lama. Later, in 2022, I was offered a last-minute spot for a month-long retreat in Kopan Monastery in Kathmandu, Nepal. That was taught by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, probably the most well-known Buddhist teacher after His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Lama Zopa passed away a few months after that retreat, so I felt very fortunate to have been able to meet him. I forgot to say that the Dalai Lama, after that experience in Bodh Gaya in India, when COVID was really rampant, I'm sure you're all aware, in Asia long before it got over to here, he didn't teach live for over 2 years after that. So I don't know if I hadn't gone or been able to go to hear him teach when I did, I might have never had the opportunity to do so. Subsequently, I had almost 5 years of study with my beloved Geshe Darge in Connecticut, thanks to the goodwill of my husband who moved there with me. And I can't help but feel blessed and also led to have been taken in hand by each of these extraordinary teachers. 3 of them I have pictures of here if you'd like to take a look. And one, I realized my mentor, my true mentor, I don't have a picture of him. I have one on my phone, but I've never had it framed. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, by the way, while he was working with the sometimes vociferous disagreements among Buddhist schools of thought, there are many, I had no idea. I had no more idea of that than that there were many Buddhas, I'm taught, over countless eons. And they didn't agree often, and sometimes just didn't get along. I'm told that Mennonites have something similar happening. So you understand, I'm not gainsaying anybody, but you might understand what it would be like for a world leader to keep tabs on all of this, to serve each constituency, to be able to listen, to be able to teach, to be able to work at bringing people together. He's brilliant at this, by the way. I don't believe that he has yet met Pope Francis of Chicago, but his book with Desmond Tutu called The Book of Joy, if you haven't come across it, it's a delightful read, very moving, about the discussions that these 2 men had with each other. And they made a film, which I didn't know, called Mission Joy, that's available to watch on Google for free. I can't recommend it because I haven't seen it myself. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama has, since I became acquainted with him, outspokenly promoted the similarities among religions the world over, but stressed not losing the autonomy of one's own chosen faith. And that's tricky business, which he manages, I think, brilliantly. So I'd like to give you just a kind of overview of Buddhist theology and philosophy. Yes, don't cringe. I will be very short about this, but I think there are elements of Buddhism that people don't know anything about, or maybe do know and don't understand. I'll be brief. Rebirth is probably the thorniest element of Buddhism for most Westerners to accept. We are compelled to return to life after life. I like to say, until we get it right. We have very little to say in that matter until we are very advanced practitioners. I had less resistance to this than I had expected, the outspoken rebel-rouser that I had been. I think in great part because I have met several highly adept Buddhist Rinpoches, people who have voluntarily returned to a new life after their death, not for their own benefit, but in order to help others. Not the least of whom is the current 14th Dalai Lama, who has returned 13 times to lead his flock. For them, this is reincarnation. This is a choice, and it's a choice of service specifically. It's not at all the same thing as rebirth. But most people, if they think about it or know anything about it at all, sort of conflate the two, but it's very different purpose. A lack of inherent existence is another one that people have a tough time with. Buddhists have a tough time with this. Our bodies and minds are made up of 5 aggregates: form, feeling, Discrimination, they like to say, until I point out that discrimination doesn't mean what they think it means. So now it's turning a little more toward discernment. Compositional factors and consciousnesses, which is 5 senses plus mental consciousness. We rely on those naturally. We have to. But we have the idea that they can constitute inherent existence, what we might call autonomy, or existing without relying on causes and conditions, beginning with our own conception and the care that we require as small children just to survive. We seem to have no difficulty understanding that a flower requires specific conditions of soil, water, light, care. But even so, they will die one day despite their needs being fulfilled. How many of us can even conceive of recognizing that the same is true of our bodies and minds? And that we do not exist purely from our own side, free from substantial input from without. At bottom, many of us not only wish to be islands, Pache Don John Dun, but in many cases believe that we could actually accomplish that on our own, as I thought when I was about 30. Karma. Is there anybody who hasn't heard of karma in this group? It's become a kind of catchword, cultural catchword. It's the result of our actions. And in fact, karma means action. It's translated as action. Whenever we engage in negative actions, the opposites of those that I enumerated at the beginning, the bases of most religions, when we do that, we accrue negative karma. When we perform positive, other-centered actions, we accrue positive karma. Make sense so far? Okay. And neither of these, by the way, has anything to do with what some people think has having good fortune or finding a good parking place. You know, I hear people talk about karma in all these. I have good parking karma. What would that possibly mean? Many Westerners in particular seem to think that all karma is good and that the results are instant. Fact is, we are constantly accruing karma of one sort or the other, and every bit of it will have an impact on our future lives. Even if we lead an exemplary life today and for the rest of this life, negative karma from many lives earlier might ripen into an impact on our next life and have something to do with what kind of life it is, what kind of being we may come back as. There's simply no telling for us. There's nobody that I know of on this earth who will have an idea how or when it would show up. The only exception being infractions such as killing your parents or attacking a Buddha, and so on. These are rare instant karma resulting in a ticket to hell immediately after death. Yes, Buddhism does recognize hells, plural. Very colorful hells. Some are built on extreme heat and some are extreme cold. And then there's a great variety of hells of excruciating pain, walking over knives and such other things. And I think in the same way, it's a cautionary tale. I don't say it doesn't exist, but the difference is that it's not meant to be a permanent state. That you can make your way out of a hell. It's just not easy because you're so overtaken by usually pain, whether it's physical or mental or both, that it's difficult to move forward and can take a long time. But it is possible. And for most people does actually happen sooner or later. Hopefully with a positive effect afterwards. Cautionary tale. When I was younger, I used to say that I didn't fear death. I just feared dying. I'm hearing a lot of yes. One of the many extraordinary aspects of Buddhism is a willingness to fully accept one's death coming. Miles apart from Emily Dickinson's "Because I Could Not Stop for Death, He Kindly Stopped for Me," the Quakers could say that their fruitful practice is to take time to meditate on what the process of dying might look and feel like, which His Holiness the Dalai Lama does every day. I have a dear friend in South Bend who just turned 90 and is feeling quite suddenly very frail and says, "I don't think I have much time left." He's clearly worried about this. And when I suggested that he maybe think about this, talk to his priest, see if the priest thinks it's a good idea to spend a little time every day imagining your own death. I find that when I meditate this way, and that's where Buddhists solve most of their problems, by the way, is in meditation, I find myself actually looking forward to my death. I can't wait to find out if what I've been taught actually comes to pass. It's liberating. I'm not getting the word. It makes me excited. So this is my personal take, okay, on some differences between the practice of Buddhism and other religions I've experienced. Partly, it's a matter of being careful what you wish for. Remember back when I said I wanted more rigor? Or did I get rigor? Rigor to the point where I'm just sometimes truly exhausted from the practices that I do, from the things that I take on. And so much of the practice is solitary that one could say that it's tailor-made for introverts, although I know many extroverts who do well with it. The burden of growth and progress lies squarely on the individual, although with study, oversight, and training from a qualified teacher, but it's up to us. There's actually a book that I picked up and haven't yet read called "It's All Up to You." And that is a basis of the Quaker faith. One practices only what one feels called to do, not what one is expected or what one feels is expected. I've never been given unsolicited advice by a Buddhist teacher or colleague, either one. I'm working as hard as I can to come to a point of compassion, meditative stability, and accretion of merit of the positive karma before I die, in the hope that I won't need to start from the beginning again of my next life. There does come a point where you reach not a stasis, but it's like a stopping point on a journey when you will not lose what you've gained going into future lives. I'm not there yet. Hardly anybody is there yet, but it's possible. The Buddha discouraged students from blind faith, from just believing what he said because he said it. He said a lot. He taught for 40 years before he died. Just believing what he said rather than he would advise people to reach one's own conclusions first by exploring all aspects of issues and teachings and practices. And only then, when one is persuaded of their efficacy, to surrender to a faith based on direct experience. That is a big It's a goal in meditation. It's a goal in interactions with other beings of all sorts, including ants. I have trouble with those. All of it is direct experience, or the search for direct experience. Given this, it should be no surprise that Buddhists don't proselytize. And one teaches only when one is asked or invited to do so. It would never occur to any of my teachers to go somewhere and just sit down and start to teach. It's just not accepted. You have to not only ask someone to teach, but you should ask 3 times before they will take the request seriously and teach whatever it is that the students want to hear. There are many, many Buddhist practices, often arising from taking specific vows. That's what this is for. This was blessed by the Dalai Lama. I do not take it off. Where was I? The vows rely, and the practices rely heavily on visualization and meditation, not only for the purpose of gaining personal peace, as important as that is, it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. But also overcoming negative issues such as anger, anxiety, self-centeredness, attachment. That's a big one. Attachment to ours, food, loved ones, oneself, etc. And also then practicing self-purification. That's a very important part. Once you realize how much negative karma you have accrued, how many things you have done or said that you are not proud of, don't want to repeat, meditation and self-purification are the cure, as it were. Cure is a very bad word, sorry. I didn't necessarily think this would take over my life. Though this is not the fault of anybody but myself, who hasn't yet learned to say no. I gravitated to some of the most demanding schools of Buddhism in terms not only of what one does, but for whom. My struggle is to give myself one day fully to the practice of bodhicitta, which means always and in all circumstances putting the needs of others before my own and vowing to protect all beings, always. It's a tall order. So I leave you with the words of Shantideva, an 8th century bodhisattva, or a master of the bodhicitta ideal. He said and wrote, "For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world."
Sure, we have questions, responses to this presentation.
You all look like my husband. When I explain what I'm doing, he said, "I don't understand a word, but I don't have any idea what you do." And bless him, he supports me anyway. Yes.
Promise myself every time I come in here, I'm not gonna make the comment. And then I can't deal with the silence that comes when the speaker asks us for comments. So here I am again.
It's new to me.
I want to thank you for coming. I feel like I've met the kindred spirit. And I just want you to know that Goshen has a women's interfaith group that meets every other month on the third Thursday, or the last Thursday.
It's this coming Thursday
At the library.
at the library.
I didn't know it was only women. I was planning to go.
We discuss that from every now and then. If a gentleman joins us, we will not refuse him entrance. Yeah, he's all
I
right.
nominate Jim.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Really.
How did you get to?
It's,
You admire the Quakers for their meditation and also for their social action.
yes.
Meditation for Buddhism, yes. Does that also promote social action?
It can. Buddhists are a little careful about social action because it, to some extent, I have to stop and think this through. To some extent, taking social action implies that you know better than someone else. I actually asked that question in a teaching of my geisha in Connecticut. And he didn't understand what I was talking about. So it took 4 or 5 people chiming in until he realized that I was talking about Donald Trump. And he said, "Oh, why didn't you say that in the beginning?" You know, he said, "It's not judgment, it's common sense." So there's a fine line there. You know, it's not that no action is taken, because that's not at all the case, but it's taken out of a space of reflection, of meditation. And I feel that the Quakers kind of prepared me for that. I'm not sure that you could call what Quakers do meditation. Certainly not in the same way a Buddhist would think of it. But reflection, yes. Thought, soul searching, all of those things that can lead to action and do. But for Buddhists, it's about letting the meditation change you from the inside. And then whatever action that comes from that is the right one. Did that answer your question?
I guess so.
Feel free.
Well, the Quakers seem to think that if they go deep down inside, they find a spirit also.
Yes,
Is that true of Buddhists?
in a different way. Having experienced both, I would call the Buddhist meditation much deeper. Yeah, what was the second part of that? Not only of deep meditation, but there was another element to that you said.
That they find a spirit.
Oh, yes. Well, there are many deities in all of the Eastern religions. You know, the Hindus have the most colorful ones with the elephants and the lions and you know. But there are not attachments, but relationships that can be drawn up with beings that you cannot see. I have some that I call my Buddha buddies that I look forward to meeting and greeting again, you know, when I meditate on the practice that is dedicated to them. So when I talked about making vows, often it is in the service of or in the relationship to a particular deity. And that's quite different from others. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I'm Donna Priest. How did you happen to come to Goshen?
Oh, well, Jim and I lived in South Bend for a good while. And we came to Goshen often. We came to bicycle the pumpkin vine. We came for pizza, of course. We came, you know, and we really liked the town. So when it came time for us to leave Connecticut, this was first on my list, you know, and I believed from what little experience I had had with Mennonites that thought I could live with Mennonites, but I had no idea. I'm bowled over by you folks and living very happily in a sea of Mennonites in Greencroft. So it's great. I'm the token Buddhist there, mind you, but that's okay, you know. And I think we can both agree, Jim and I, that this was the right choice for us.
I'm John Litteroff. I just appreciate very much your spirit, the spirit of kindness and grace that you show.
Thank you.
I wonder, do you have any way describing to us what routines do you have? Like I have routines. Do you have routine?
Oh, well, I can describe it to a point. Each day, I am committed to doing 6 rounds of a particular practice every day. That takes me, all told, some is in the morning, some is in the evening. It's 2.5 to 3 hours. On top of that, if I choose, and for many of the vows that one takes attached to a particular deity, the consequence is a daily practice dedicated to them. So that could take up a little bit of time or a lot of time. I did a retreat in the fall for 2 weeks. And a small group of those who participated thought they wanted to be working and doing the same practice, which involved, as do visualization, prayer, meditation, recitation of mantras. And so we get together every other week at 7 in the morning and work our way through this practice, which takes 2.5 hours. So, you know, from day to day, it varies, but I find that I don't function very well if I don't follow that routine. Sometimes I have to do my practice in the car while I'm driving somewhere, but I do it every day. Right now, Jim's already smiling. I'm overwhelmed by the study of Sanskrit language, which has really taken over my life. The end of this class is Wednesday. I've always wanted to learn Sanskrit because most of the chants are written in Sanskrit, and I just have a hard time finding people who can translate them for me. So I'm going to be gradually learning how to do that myself. So all in all, if I chose, I could be a hermit and do this all day. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I mean, there's nobody to tell me that I have to do this. Yes,
Hi, I'm Barbara Johnson.
I'm sorry, I can't see
I'm
you.
Barbara Johnson. And I was.
Could you stand up or something? I
Sure.
can't see you. Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
I
hi.
couldn't tell where the voice was coming from.
Hi, yeah, I'm kind of short. This is changing the subject a bit, I suppose, but I'm kind of wondering about your music, including your Buddhism, how that transition is. Don't know if you're practicing your music anymore, but I hear you were an opera singer. I would just love to hear you sing a little piece. I don't know if you do that, but I would like to hear you, how you feel about that combination.
It's not a combination for me.
No, it's.
It can be for some people, but when I retired from singing and then retired from teaching, I put that aside. I did happily. And today, I just had surgery Friday. I don't think I could sing anything at all. I'm sorry. What I have been thinking about, though, that I could do, if folks might find this interesting, is that I have a number of CDs, solo CDs that I could give to the library, to the public library.
That would be great.
Okay, I'll do that. Yes. Oh, you have to wait for a mic.
John Yorty, I want to thank you for the way in which you put together your presentation. It was very perceptive, thoughtfully done, and gave us a real sense of your journey. Can you tell me just a little bit more about the four moral truths of Buddhism?
Noble truths. I knew somebody would ask that. I gravitated to the three elements that I thought people might have heard something about, misunderstood if they thought about it at all. And I didn't want to get too deep into the minutiae of Buddhist thought because I wanted you to all have something to take away. But the Four Noble Truths were the first thing that the Buddha taught. Four being the truth of suffering, that in this life, like it or not, whatever we do, we will be suffering at some point or another. Has anybody found that not to be the case? We all have it. It's part of our life. Then comes, this is where it gets harder, the cause of suffering. And the cause of suffering is not always where we think it is. You know, we want to say it's because of something outside us or someone else. But it has to do with, the origin of it has to do with our craving. Again, it might be something concrete. Food is mine. Chocolate in particular. Don't do very well without chocolate. Can't stay awake very well without chocolate. But it's the cravings that get us into trouble. Think about that. Not what's going on inside, not what's going on outside you, but what you're wishing for. The third is the cessation of suffering. In other words, to say that it is possible to overcome this. Some people just throw up their hands and say, there's nothing I can do. There's no way out of this for me. But the Buddha was there to say, yes, there is. And then the fourth is the path to end suffering. Anybody, if from what I've said today, take a guess as to what that means? It's the teacher in me, I can't help it. What could be a path to end suffering? Yes.
Giving up attachment.
And how do you do that?
Giving up what?
Attachment. Giving up attachment. Our son died, and we suffer with that. I don't think I can give up that attachment.
You don't think, I'm sorry?
Our son died from brain cancer.
So sorry.
Enormous pain, more than I've ever experienced. But I don't see how I can give up my attachment to the life we had together for 6 years.
There is a difference between fondness and fond memories and being attached, which means not being able to move forward. And there's no timeline for that. There's nobody to say, and no Buddhist would ever say, you've got to get over this and move on. For us, it would be something we work on in meditation. Maybe over and over and over again, and maybe for a long time. But if the intention is there, if it's something you really would like to be able to overcome, meditation can be a way to do that. Does that make sense to you? And not with any sense of, I have to do this, or I have to do this by X date, or because we're going to see such and such people. Doesn't matter. It's an inner issue, and it's for the person who's dealing with it. Yes.
So could you say it's a direction?
Back here.
It's not a goal, but a direction?
It's more than either one.
In what way?
It's about, okay, it's about giving up the self. I talked a little about lack of inherent existence. If you don't believe that we truly live by our own lights, then that's step one. And that's not easy to get to. I'm not there. I've been working at this for about 10 years now. I'm not there. 10 years, yes, since Trump was elected. But it's about giving into the fact that we can't do it all because we want to, just because we want to, or because somebody else wants us to do it, whatever it is, to accept that and embrace that issue now in whatever way you can. And the more you work at that, like the Dalai Lama says, he has worked on issues for 40 or 50 years. And grandly, a few years ago, described how he overcame something that he had been working at every day for 50 years. And he gets up at 4:30 in the morning every day to do his prayer and practice. He worked on these issues every day, 50 years. There's no way of telling when it will come, but it will.
I'm Marlon Clausen, and there was a couple of things in common with you folks. One is that Jim and I both grew up in Nebraska. And that's where the similarity ends.
I didn't grow up in Nebraska. Jim did.
But Jim also, I Googled his name. And learned that back in the 70s, there's a guy by the name of Jim Riggleman that played basketball for Notre Dame University. And I asked him if that was the same guy, and he said yes. So I found that to be very interesting.
Stand up, Jim, and they'll see why. Stand up. You don't have to say anything.
He's a whole head taller than I. I think 6'8" or something. 6'9". But I find myself being a small puddle in that pool of Mennonitism.
Puddle in which pool?
In your pool, the whole thing, sea of Mennonitism, to be very delightful. We live on the same hall, just across the hall from me. And these are the first people that introduced themselves to me. They made themselves known, and I cherish their friendship.
I think we will. Thank you. One last question.
One of the things that we learn about Buddhism is that you have monks. What
You
is
can't what?
monks? MONKS. Monks.
Yes.
Could you describe the calling of a Buddhist monk? And is there any equivalent for women in leadership?
I don't think there's any difference between the calling of a Buddhist monk and a Christian monk. They decide to set away worldly concerns, to devote themselves to prayer and practice, I think it's very much the same. What they do is not necessarily the same, but the impetus, I think, is very similar. What was the other part of your question?
Is there a feminine equivalent? Feminine equivalent.
Oh, there are female monks in Buddhism, just as much as there are female nuns. I said monks, they're nuns. Yeah.
Let's say thank you.
Thank you.
I think she's very much a part of us. A part of you.
I consider myself so, thank you.